Hi, I'm Dan Nichole. Welcome to Layout Building. In this episode, I want to talk about the garden railroad that Nichole and I have been building outside on our property. When Nichole and I first moved to our property, we thought it would be fun to have a garden railroad. Last year, we had a loop of track in our Halloween maze, but that was temporary. For this year, I wanted to install a larger permanent track that will be the first part of a larger garden railroad. My concept for the outdoor layout is to have a loop-to-loop plan that can function as a point-to-point railroad. It will be single track with passing sidings. Most large-scale trains share the same 45mm track gauge, regardless of whether the equipment is 1/32 scale, 1/24, etc. Nichole and I did a video about scale and gauge that explains this in more detail if you want to know more. Large scale is often generically referred to as G scale, but technically this layout is going to be Fn3 scale, which represents 3-foot narrow gauge with a 1:20.3 scale ratio. I'm thinking of this part of the layout as phase 1. It will be the loop at the east end of the line. Since this part of the layout will also be part of our holiday displays, I wanted to have an oval so that trains can run continuously without getting too far away from the holiday area. To accomplish that, I designed an oval with a Y on one end. Eventually, the Y will lead to the rest of the layout. I should note that unlike the Siren Creek or Donner Pass layouts, which were planned in a lot of detail, I haven't yet designed anything west of the Y. The idea is to expand the layout gradually as time and finances allow, and to fill in the blanks as we go along. I thought a lot about what kind of track I wanted to use. The scale modeler in me wanted to use code 250 rail, which is closer to scale in 1:20.3. After doing some research, though, it sounded like the larger code 332 rail used by LGB and other brands was more durable. We've had a lot of frustration with landscapers breaking things in our yard, like the drip system and sprinklers. I don't even want to think about how many times I've had to fix those. I don't want to add track to that list. This part of the layout is also in the area where parents bring their children through the yard at Halloween. It's possible, or maybe even likely, that the track is going to get stepped on. For those reasons, I decided to use code 332 in this area. When we expand the layout into the back of the property, we could maybe use some code 250 there. We'll have to save that decision for the future. Code 332 brass track from LGB, Pico, and USA Trains is also readily available, which is a plus. So one of the things that I quickly learned about doing a garden railroad is that the track is pretty expensive. That's led me to think more like a real railroad and try to minimize the track work as much as possible. I think in the smaller scales like HO or N, there's a temptation to want to put in more track than you really need. In those scales, it's not such a big deal. But outside, you have to think about the cost of the track, and also that it's a lot of work to put in and it's a lot of work to maintain. So minimizing the track work and trying to design a plan that uses what's there very effectively is kind of important. So one decision I made early on was that this was going to be a dead rail layout. All of my large scale equipment is battery powered with remote controls. It's basically, I'm using AirWire, and that allows me to use regular DCC decoders, and there's a receiver, and I have a little remote, and I can still do sound and all that stuff that I like, but it's all over the air, and the locomotives get power from a battery. I've run them on other people's layouts, and they seem to last for quite a while. I mean, hours. You can run a train for hours on a battery charge. So it works pretty well, and it eliminates the need to try to clean the track. I'm worried in this area because we live in a semi-agricultural area, and there's always dust in the air from tractors plowing things and stuff like that. So I think trying to keep the track clean would be kind of frustrating. Another thing I was worried about is because the layout could eventually get to be quite large, is voltage drop. That's something I never really had to deal with on the indoor layouts that I've had, but they've all been fairly small. When you're talking about potentially hundreds of feet of track, I think that could maybe become an issue, and I just don't want to deal with stuff like that. Most of my equipment is steam era, so I think having a backwoods narrow gauge kind of feel kind of goes along with trying to keep things as simple as possible. By the same token, I'm also using manual controls for all the switches. I don't want to have any switch machines. The only wiring I might do eventually that I'm planning is maybe some structure lighting, but those don't move, and that could be done later. So anyway, just something to think about with the outdoor layout. I would highly recommend using batteries, or I guess I could also run live steam, although I don't have any of those at this moment. We'll see if I ever want to do that. But I think battery is definitely a good way to go outside. Let's take another look at the plan. I've purposely not put any switches on the stretch of track close to the driveway. I want to make sure that the holiday visitors aren't tempted to throw any switches while the train is running around the display area. There's a passing siding on the backside near the fence. On the Y end, I'm using LGB R5 curve track, which makes about a 15-foot diameter circle. LGB labels their curves R1, R2, R3, and R5, with 5 being the largest. They don't seem to have an R4. Since we have the room, I want to use the largest curves possible. From running on other railroads, I've learned that my model of Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge 460 number 8 doesn't like sharp curves. The LGB 18,000 curves match the curve leg through the LGB R5 turnouts. The LGB turnouts are built to a curve radius, not a turnout number, but they look close to a number 4. USA Trains makes actual number 6 large-scale switches, but they're more expensive since they come with a built-in electric switch motor and signal. I may look into those in the future, but I didn't really want to buy something that expensive and then discard part of it. If I did my math right, in 1/20th scale, the R5 curves are equivalent to an approximate 21-inch radius in Hon3. One advantage of using the LGB turnouts is that since they can replace a section of curve track, it gives me a lot of flexibility to determine where to place the turnouts for the Y. On the other end of the layout, I'm going to use curve track from USA Trains that makes a 20-foot diameter circle. That equates to about a 27-inch radius in Hon3. I also have a rail bender for custom curves, though I don't expect to need it just yet. With something this large, I went into it knowing that I would probably be making adjustments as I went along. Planning is great, but now I need to determine the actual real-world track placement. I made a makeshift compass with a sandbag, some cord, and a piece of PVC pipe. I'm using this to trace the path of the 20-foot diameter curve. Since the LGB curves arrive first, I'm going to start by mocking up the west curve. Right now it's headed toward the dead tree, so I need to adjust the position. This is doing full-size track planning. I've already made some changes to my original idea. I flipped the passing siding location since that leaves a wider path near the fence for walking. I'm also trying to keep the tracks at least 3 feet away from any of the tree trunks in our orchard. After the larger USA Trains curve tracks finally arrived, I mocked up the other end of the layout. Now that I know where the track is going, I can start putting it down permanently. The area of our property around the fruit trees is covered with plastic weed barrier and a layer of gravel. I did the work in short sections, maybe 6 to 8 feet at a time. I started near the curve past the switch on the west end of the passing siding. Before I started doing anything else, I started raking the gravel that was already on the ground. A 2x4 makes a good screed. I used the shorter ones for the curve sections, but I had a longer one for straights. I adjusted the rocks until the area under the track was more or less level. Then I built roadbed using some smaller gravel. I needed to level this as well. Once that was done, I compacted it, then leveled it again. For now, the track is just resting on top of the roadbed. I used Pico rail clamps to hold the LGB track sections together. These are easier to put on before the tracks go together, although they can be split apart and reassembled over the joints on existing track work. The USA Trains sections have a different system. Each rail joiner has a slot in it, and the rail end is tapped for a screw. The USA Trains screws are available separately and include a small hex driver. The screws are small, and if they fall into the ballast, they will disappear forevermore. Thankfully, there are a lot of them in the bag. I got the oval completed, or at least completed enough, just in time for us to start putting out Halloween decorations. As I mentioned, I made some changes to the plan during construction. Besides the passing siding, I also added a turnout that will eventually lead to an industry or two inside the oval. The track is still just sitting on top of the ballast. Eventually I want to spread some more ballast over the top of the track and make some fine-tuning adjustments, but it was working well enough to get us through the holidays. As expected, I was not able to complete the Y before having to stop work. I did install a culvert made of PVC pipes so that we could run an extension cord into the center of the oval for holiday decorations. Weather is something that makes doing a layout outside different from doing a layout inside, for sure. I started doing this layout in the summer of 2023, and we had some really hot days and it was just too hot to work outside. Sometimes I would go out in the evening when it cooled off and work for maybe an hour until the sun went down. But I had to kind of work around that. And then, now that it's winter, we've had some really, really cold weather and some rain, so that's kind of discouraged me from working outside too. I'm expecting to get back to the layout maybe a little later in the year when things start to warm up a bit. Weeds are also an issue. Somehow they want to grow even in gravel with plastic under it and no dirt at all. I try to get them when they're small and easy to pull. I'm happy that so far the roadbed has held up through several rainstorms. I was a little concerned because I used pea gravel and later found out that people recommend not using pea gravel because the rocks are rounded and tend to move. In the future I may switch to a rougher gravel for the ballast, but so far the roadbed is staying put. So when you're doing a railroad outdoors, the track laying techniques are of course a little different because you're working with different materials. Doing a railroad in the garden is more like building a real railroad. You're using dirt and rock and real kind of materials like that. Whereas, when you're laying track indoors, it's often on, plywood with some kind of cork or other roadbed under it. And, the techniques of putting the track down and stuff are very different. However, from kind of a theoretical point of view, it's very similar in the sense that you need to make sure that your roadbed is nice and level, make sure that it's, the track's not tilting this way and that, make sure that your straight sections are straight. You want to make sure it doesn't have undulations. If you have any grades, you want to make sure you figured those out and make sure that they're, 1% or 2% or whatever it is, so that the equipment will handle it. I managed to get the oval built, leveling it as I went around. And by the time I closed it off, I think it was off by maybe ½ an inch. So after smoothing that out, there is a slight grade on the driveway side of the oval, but it's so small that it really doesn't affect anything. And so far I haven't had any issues with that. So after I got all the track down, I measured it, and to get around the loop is 138 feet. So that seems like a pretty decent length. Even if I never made the layout any larger, that's still a pretty good run. And the passing siding has a usable length of about 32 feet, which I think will handle just about any train I could put together. I don't have all that much large-scale equipment right now, so that's going to be more than adequate for that. And it'll also serve as a runaround track for trains that are switching the industries that'll eventually be inside the oval. So that's where things stand right now. As the weather gets better, I want to get back outside and do some more work on the layout. I want to complete the industrial area inside the loop, finish the Y, and then start extending the layout down the property. I think it's going to be pretty fun. I'm not exactly sure what the whole layout's going to look like yet, because I'm kind of making it up as I go along rather than planning it first, which is kind of backwards for me, but I'm having fun with it. I think Nicole's having fun with it, and we'll see where we go with it. Anyway, if you like this video, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.